Hello and welcome to our first Access Matters session. Access Matters is our new platform that's designed to encourage listening, sharing of experience, learning from best practice and collaboration on the actions that will have the greatest positive impact for our industry. I'm delighted that for our first talk we're joined by Sara Hawthorn, Managing Director of InFusion Comms and Diversity Champion. Good morning, Sara.
Morning, Rebecca. Thank you very much for asking me to join your session today.
Thanks for joining us. Sara will tell us her story covering her career in PR and how life as a deaf individual has impacted it and her journey to applying for and receiving Blueprint Ally status. Before I pass over to Sara, I'd like to remind everyone that we're encouraging engagement, so please do submit questions using the Q&A tab on your screen or in the chat for all to see, and Sara will try and answer as many as she can. We're also running a really short poll during the event. It's anonymous and we'd love for you to take part. But for now, it's over to you, Sara.
Thank you. So I guess, thank you very much for joining us today. I am really looking forward to telling you a little bit more about my experience and my journey, as Rebecca mentioned. I guess the best place to start really is when and why I was diagnosed with hearing loss. That happened when I was really young. I passed all my baby checks, but I had mumps when I was a very young child, and when I was about 4 or 5, I hung up the phone on my grandmother because I couldn't hear her. And that's kind of how they figured out that something was wrong with my hearing. So I had a few tests and I had lost all the hearing in my right side. And I had a little bit of loss in my left, but not too much at the time. And so I went on and they fitted me with hearing aids when I got a bit older, but this was the 80s and the hearing aids were awful. They were so bad. They were analog, they were big, they were clunky, they were uncomfortable. And as I grew up, I got less inclined to wear them. When I got told I had to wear glasses, and then I got braces, and I thought, well, that's a bit of a combination of some things. And I thought, you know what? No, I'm not going to bother. Forget that. And I kept on that way pretty much my whole life until I hit late 20s. And one of the problems I have with my ears is I keep getting a lot of ear infections. And I went back to the doctors who referred me to another audiologist, and at this time I was living down south. And they fitted me with a new hearing aid, and it felt a lot like the world had just opened up to me. I hadn't realised how much I had actually missed out on in the world. It's like someone had literally removed a pillow from my face because everything had been muffled for me, and I was so used to it. That's the way my world was now, that I hadn't really realised what I'd missed. And that hearing aid was great, and it brought me a lot of new experiences. But then we moved back up north, and I went back to another audiologist, and they offered me an upgrade, and I thought, oh, a hearing aid upgrade, fantastic, let's go with that. And this time they fitted me with 2, except they're called bi-cross hearing aids, and what that means is I have one in my right ear, and it acts as sort of a microphone. It doesn't transmit anything into the ear, obviously, because the ear doesn't work, but it transmits the sound via Bluetooth into my left hearing aid, which gives me multi-directional sound, which is something I'd never really experienced. And the first time I had them fitted, I walked out of Leeds Audiology Clinic. I came out of the driveway, out of the gate, and a man walked past me and he sneezed right here. And I just went, and I stood to look at him, and I was so shocked by the noise and the loudness and the crispness of that noise that I was just in awe walking all the way home. And I went to meet my partner, and we went to the supermarket, and the noise was just overwhelming. It was so crisp, and there was the noise of trays going in supermarkets and trolleys and all sorts. It was just this cacophony of sound that I had just never acknowledged. And it set me thinking about all those years that I had never said anything to anybody, that I just struggled on. I'd learned to cope and put a lot of coping mechanisms in place. And I thought to myself, hang on, I could probably had a little bit of an easier time of it had I accepted the help quicker, and had I been really honest about the way things were with me in my world and how muffled and quiet it was. And then I started thinking more about my work experiences, and I worked in media industry on and off since I was really 17, 18, and the only time that I was ever open about my hearing loss was in my last agency before I set up InFusion Comms, and that was a really big step for me, and I felt nervous about doing it, and I was a bit worried about reactions. And to that point, I'd never come across another PR professional, media professional with another disability or an impairment at all. And I'd never spoken to anyone else in the industry who was going through anything similar. And I thought, this must be something missing from our organisations. Who's missing that could be in organisations, or are there other people with impairments in organisations and disabilities that we're just not having those conversations, that everything is quiet and kept secret? And that was really what brought me to do more and more on disability and PR specifically. So it was partly how my own journey influenced my life and having this new world opened up for me, but also what I'd gone through in my workplaces and the experiences that I'd had. And one of the questions I do get quite a lot when I talk about subjects like this is, what were your experiences? Did you have any problems? And I have to say no to that question, because I didn't really have any problems, because I just wasn't open about it. But that in itself was a problem, and that was a challenge. And I would love, my goal, I suppose, what I would really love is for more people to be open about any disability or impairments that they have, for that discussion to not even be an issue. It's just accepted, and that's what it is, and for more disabled individuals to work in our PR community. And really I started speaking about this and writing about it in different ways, and then things sort of snowballed a little bit from there. And a couple of years ago I set up a Twitter account, which is Disability PR Network, because there was nothing really focused on disability for PR and comms at all. So from that, it ticked over for a little while, and obviously at the same time I set up my own agency. So I was running that, trying to do all the individual things that I was interested in, like the disability PR stuff, and for a long time it just ticked over as a Twitter account. But really recently I was able to get some free time and develop it into a website, which is now launched, and have it as a resource site where, for employers and for employees, we talk about different things associated with disability in the workplace, particularly related to PR, and that's under development at the moment. So it is tricky trying to manage them both, and I do a lot of it in my spare time, evenings and weekends, but I'm really hopeful that becomes a community resource where people can go and find out information that they want, or pose questions, or we can shed light on topics that just aren't discussed anymore. And alongside that, in the last few months, as Rebecca mentioned, I was awarded, well, the agency was awarded the Blueprint kitemark at ally status. And the Blueprint is something that I was involved with for a couple of years, really since 2018 was the first meeting I think that we had on it. And it was to talk about a whole host of different things, a Blueprint kitemark being, or Blueprint mark being one of those things. And when we developed it and when we'd gone through the process, Elizabeth Vananuka, who set it all up and who's the absolute mastermind behind it, had said, who wants to be the first one to apply? And for me, it felt like an absolute no-brainer. Like there was no other choice not to do it. We'd gone this far with it, and I was doing so much in diversity and the disability side of it, it made perfect sense to apply for the mark as well. That happened during the pandemic. So on top of everything else, we submitted the application and went through the process when we were all working from home and everything was in complete chaos. And then we were awarded the mark, and things obviously have kind of snowballed from there, and the mark has got some fantastic coverage and a lot of people talking about it, and it's a really exciting thing to be part of. And for me, as I continue to sort of go through this journey and talk about disability PR, I think I really wish that other people would look at all these different aspects of it as well. So there's so much to consider when we talk about diversity and PR. There's so many different facets to it, and for me, disability is kind of my, it's kind of my thing. I really enjoy talking about it, and I will talk about it for ages. But that doesn't exclude me from being part of change in other areas as well. So the Blueprint for us was definitely a must-have for our organisation. And one of the questions I do get asked a lot actually is how to build a diverse agency. And I've been asked that quite a few times, and I've really thought about what I would say to someone who asked me that question. And the truth is, I haven't set out to build a diverse agency. My goal is not to look like a Channel 4 ad. Like I'm not, sitting here thinking, right, how do I make it the most diverse agency going? What I want to do is try and create a good agency. I want to try and create one that's welcoming of people, one that acts professionally and ethically, and diversity is a natural part of doing that and a natural part of that process for us. And I think really that's where I've got to in my background in terms of the disability PR sort of work that I've been doing. I think one thing is probably worth bringing in is that when I was open about it in my last agency, the action was really okay. And I did ask for 2 reasonable adjustments during that time. And the reasonable adjustments that I asked for were a phone that worked with my hearing aids, that was hearing aid compatible, and to not sit in a position in the room where I had my back to people or the bad side out to the room, just one where I could see the room, see it open to me, and kind of if anybody was waving at me and I hadn't heard them, I could catch their eye and communicate that way as well. And I think one of the things that is particularly maybe challenging for a lot of employers is that they worry about reasonable adjustments and how much it's going to cost them and whether there's going to be a lot of work to do. But the average reasonable adjustment is £95, which is actually a lot lower than a lot of people think it's going to be. And the adjustments they can be small, like sitting where you position a room. It could be flexible working, but we need to be able to have the discussion about reasonable adjustments in order to figure out what they are, and hopefully through things like the Disability PR Network we can start having those discussions and open them up a lot more. That's really my background and where I came to in terms of coming to terms with my own hearing loss. I think one of the other things probably worth mentioning is I don't know sign language. A lot of people assume because I have hearing loss I can sign. I can do an alphabet and I know some swear words, but that is about the sum total of my sign language knowledge. For me, I rely on lip reading a lot and I struggle when people cover the mouths. The mask issue is a problem for me. I actually have a badge coming that says please be patient and deaf to help me in shops because it just gives me a bit of time. So between a glass screen and a mask, I struggle quite a lot. I have myself bought a transparent mask, which I posted on Twitter and LinkedIn to show you what that looks like. It's got a little access panel in it, just to try and help other people communicate as well. So when I'm speaking to people, I try and be in front of them if possible. A lot of people have a habit of kind of doing this and kind of talking, and they'll put the hand in front of their mouth and wave it around, and that's really difficult for me. And sometimes I'll be honest, I have been in a situation where someone was doing that so much, I swiped their hand away and I felt terrible for doing it, but I was getting really frustrated at the time and I just went like that, and there was a moment of silence between us and I thought, I'm very sorry, I didn't mean to do that, I just need to lip read. And again, that was in the earlier days when I had just been fitted with a new hearing aid as well. So there was very much a learning process for me in coming to terms in how I spoke about my hearing loss, how I told people, what the reactions were when I told people, and what I told them I needed as well. And I think that's quite a big process for me to have gone through, but it's really helped me come to terms with that and come to terms with what I'm doing and how I guess I've been talking and promoting diversity and disability diversity in PR.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was really interesting and really informative. Like, I'm really bad at covering my mouth when I talk, so it's just a really quick little thing that we can all stop doing to try and help everybody else. So we've been running a poll during the session, so I'm just going to close polling now. So I asked the question, have you ever felt discriminated against in the workplace? 56% of people have said yes, which isn't as bad as I was thinking, I'll be honest. Sarah, what do you think of these of the results, with 56% saying yes and 12% saying that they're not sure, which is worrying that they're not quite sure on, is that discrimination or am I being oversensitive or?
Yeah, I think I'm not surprised by that result. I think it's sad, but I'm not overly surprised by it. And the same with the not sure as well. I think I spoke about ableism a couple of weeks ago on a Blueprint training workshop, and what came out of that discussion was that a lot of people were really surprised at what ableism actually is, and the actions that would fall under ableism. So if you're not sure, I think a lot of people are we've been brought up, I guess, and put in a position where we're taught to maybe be a bit to second guess ourselves, as in, oh, hold on, was that person being offensive, or am I being oversensitive? I think our first thought is that it's us rather than the other person, and I think that's a big thing that needs to change. We always look to ourselves to see if we're the ones being, oversensitive or overreacting first, and it should be, well, hang on, you've said this, is that okay? I'm okay, rather than putting the blame on ourselves, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is, like you said, one thing that we're all guilty of, being like, oh, it's probably me. Yes, that's really interesting to get your thoughts as well. So one of the things that kind of I want to ask is, what are the best things about working in an all-female PR agency? So it's quite unusual to have a small but all-female agency, especially in the tech sector. It's fantastic, it's amazing, but so what are the best things about it? And I won't ask the worst, because let's keep it positive.
Yeah. We have a really open team, and I am very grateful for that. I have a lovely team that works with me, and we speak. I try to be really open with them, and that promotes open discussion. And we're quite, we're doers, I guess, is the thing. Like we just get to it, and we don't mess around. We're like, this needs done, right? Okay, let's go and do it. And we foster discussion, and there's a lot of respect in our agency. We all have a deep respect for each other, and I think that's really lovely to come from the team. And I'm not saying that wouldn't happen if it was a mixed team. And actually, probably the only caveat I would say is that I don't personally think all of one thing is ever a good idea. As we grow, I don't want to remain all one thing, because diversity is diversity for a reason. The more people you have in your team from different backgrounds, etc., the better it is, because you can foster all those amazing discussions and insights and knowledge and skills. But it has been brilliant to develop the team as an all-female team, and really almost try and empower the team, because they are, they're young women, they're at the start of their careers, and I'm sort of the angry feminist boss in the corner, for one of a better word.
I love it.
No, don't use just in your emails. Don't justify your position. You have a right to ask those questions. Here, I'm like the old wizened one in the corner saying, don't fall for the patriarchy. But so it's been nice to kind of try and empower them and give them the confidence and skills to progress in their career as well.
That's fantastic. That's really good. So kind of linked to that as well, when you were applying for the Blueprint Ally status, was that kind of like on your shoulders, or was it a whole team effort? Kind of how much input did the rest of the agency have?
We were open. I was open about applying for it, and the fact we were going through it. I would probably, in hindsight, have liked to have involved the team a little bit more than I did, but because of when we did it, we were sort of run off our feet at the time in terms of managing a lot of crisis comms for clients, and the team were really stretched. Everyone was on lockdown, and I almost didn't want to add too much more pressure to them, because I knew they were already busy. A few of us were ill, so I had COVID myself, a colleague of mine had COVID, so we were going through it at the time, and so there was a lot happening, and I kind of took that on my shoulders and did it. But in all honesty, in hindsight, I would probably have wanted more involvement from the team. So we have to reapply in 2 years in order to retain the mark. So at that point, yeah, it'll be a full-on, everyone's involved in this.
Yeah, bigger, more like maybe a bloke in there as well, kind of.
Yeah, why not?
So obviously you're based in Leeds, which is outside of the London bubble, where the majority of kind of PR agencies are. So it looks like COVID-19 is going to change how we work and remove the need to be in the office 5 days a week. Do you think that this is the end of the London bubble when it comes to kind of all the jobs being in one place? Do do you think we'll see more talent and job opportunities around the UK?
That's hard. It's hard to know, to be honest. I would like to think so, because there is so much talent up in the north, across, like even from like Birmingham and up, you know, there's a lot of talent in this area. And one of the issues that we've had in Leeds over the years is people graduating and then thinking that they have to go to London to make it. But there's so many fab agencies up here doing great things, and we've always been a flexible agency. I've always maintained that I don't want people stuck at their desks for presenteeism. Like, we work from everywhere, and I travel quite a lot because we have a base in Scotland as well. Travel on train, I work on trains, I worked on train stations and libraries and in cafes, you know, wherever it is. If I have a Wi-Fi connection, we can pretty much work. So why don't we take advantage of that? Why don't we embrace it? So during lockdown for us, we didn't really have a big shift. It wasn't too dramatic for us because we were already set up to offer that flexible and working from home idea. And I would like to think now that more people know it's possible, we don't see a sudden slip backwards. And I think there's been a bit of a difficult conversation in that it's either working from home or working from the office, but it's the flexibility, it's the options that we need to present people. So I think, given like the ridiculous house prices and cost of living in London, it wouldn't surprise me if more people kind of move out and maybe they only commute in once or twice a week or a month or whatever it is. So yeah, I would like to think we see more of a spread of talent throughout the country.
Yeah, that's good. It's good to hear. So when it comes to kind of like recruitment, I guess, like many people, myself included, I look at an organisation or an agency that approaches inclusivity in the workplace. And people are looking at that when they're considering applying for jobs or considering a new employer. Do you think that we're going to see people kind of calling out these employers or potential employers and holding the industry to account over the hopefully coming months, years, foreseeable future?
Yeah, I think we're already starting to see more of that, to be honest. And it's good that we do, because, you know, we all have a responsibility to make this industry better. And one of the reasons that we applied for the blueprint was it wasn't just about our agency, it was about the wider industry. And having that mark for us comes with a responsibility. You know, if I see something and I don't say anything about it, that is an issue. And I do take that quite seriously. In the past sort of few weeks, I've contacted 2 local organisations who are running events, and they were hosting all white panels. And I was like, what are you doing? There's like 14, 15 speakers on here. Why are you doing an entirely white able panel? You know, and it is difficult, and it's not easy to do. I think calling that out is a scary thing to do, but we owe it to ourselves and our industry to do it, because if more people do it, you'll force the change, and then you won't be on your own. It won't just be you saying, hold on a minute, why have you not done this? It'll be you and 5 other people saying that. And, you know, I'm really conscious that I have an all-white team, and that was something I wanted to address. And the reason we're, like I say on the blog, we wrote about it, we don't want to stay that way. So that's why we wanted to apply for the blueprint mark. And I have to, you know, acknowledge that and say, right, okay, yeah, we are this at the moment, this is not okay. As we grow, it has to change, and it will change, and here's how we're going to do it. But if I didn't do that, and if I grew and I had 4 more members of staff and every one of them was a white female, I'd expect someone to go, what are you doing? Why? This is not what you signed up to. It's not what you said you were going to do. So yeah, it's difficult, but we do have a responsibility to do it.
Yeah, I think it's quite, like you said, it's scary and empowering at the same time, but we've got to kind of take that power back and use it for good. So my final question, so if there's one thing you could change about the PR industry and how they treat people with disabilities, what would it be?
Don't overlook and underestimate, because I think that's what we do. We tend to overlook disabled people as great resources, and we tend to underestimate their ability when we do see them. So don't overlook and underestimate.
Love it. So we have had some questions in from the audience, which is great. Okay. Loving this engagement. Okay, so I've got a question. How could we help if we notice someone is discriminated in the workplace, like colleges, especially in PR agencies? So I guess it's about, kind of links back to calling out that the what we're seeing and saying something? How do we go about that?
Yeah, I guess that if it's something quite blatant, then then you clearly, so like it's out and out racism, for example, or ableism, then speak up at the time to help make that person feel that you have their back, they're being discriminated against, because no doubt that person probably feels quite on their own and isn't sure how to react. If they're a junior staff member, for example, they need the support of the colleagues. So either just say straight out, excuse me, I don't think that's not acceptable, that's a pretty terrible thing to say, or go down the proper channels if you can, speak to the person individually, and then the line manager go, look, I observed this is what I seen. I felt that it was hugely discriminatory because of this. What can we do about it? Or how can we do about it? This needs action. And just step up, I think is a big thing, like just step up and actually do and say something. And I like we just had discussion, it's not easy, like it is a bit scary to do that, and you might think, oh, am I overstepping the mark? But if it's really blatant, then you're not, because it's not on, like it isn't acceptable, and we have to be able to go, think you really shouldn't be saying things like that.
Yeah. So this kind of ties in with the empowering kind of and standing up. But so I've had a question in saying, have you ever struggled with confidence? I'm the only one at my agency that has a hearing and visual disability, and it can sometimes be frustrating not having somebody to relate to at work.
Yes, absolutely. Like imposter syndrome never leaves. Like I always struggle with confidence, particularly in social situations. I once did a whole pitch years ago, and I don't know what was said in that pitch. I went in with my team in a PR agency. I do not know what was said in that pitch, because it was this could sound right. There was three old white guys, essentially. It must have been in the late 60s. And these big old red leather chairs in this like weird setting, and they mumbled so much. I hadn't come out about my hearing loss at that point, and I was like, I have literally no idea what they're saying, none. And I didn't have the confidence to speak up and go, I'm sorry, could you just repeat that? And I struggle with confidence all the time, I really do. And it's only, I think, really coming to terms with it and owning my own hearing loss and saying, oh, hold on, sorry, I'm deaf and I didn't get that. Can you repeat that last phrase? And one of the things that did give me a bit of confidence was I went to a hearing therapist a few years ago who gave me some really good, helpful tips. And usually if we don't hear something and we ask someone to repeat it, they'll repeat it in exactly the same way they said it the first time. So if you didn't catch it the first time, you're probably not going to catch it the second time. And she said, instead of asking them for that, to just say it again, say something like, I was with you up until this point, but then I didn't get the last part of your sentence. Could you mind repeating that so I've got it and I'm clear? And actually that helped me a lot, being able to give really specific instructions to people. But in terms of confidence for work, I think that is quite difficult, and that should come in support from your colleagues and your line management as well. So your line manager, I think, is really important in that, and in providing that encouragement. So if you don't feel confident because of maybe the way you've been treated or how your work's been received, it might be that your organisation needs more training, because actually that's ableism, and they're naturally discounting you because your work can't be that good because you've got an impairment. So that might be something to raise. Or just to go to your line manager and actually say, look, I'm struggling with confidence a little bit. Can I do a leadership course? Can I do something else? And I think it's on our line managers to step up and really provide that support as much as possible.
That's really, really useful. And I would really like the idea of a kind of signposting where and when people can help as well. I think that's really useful for me as well. If you didn't understand what I was saying, then I could know exactly where I needed to be more clear. So we're having loads of questions. So there's been a big increase in digital events and webinars this year, for obvious reasons. Do you know if there's a best practice guide on making these inclusive? So they've said, I'll be aware now that if there are any slides on screen, it prevents lip reading. So hooray, we're getting somewhere already.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. So I find Zoom calls exhausting. So there was a few months ago, I've lost track of time, like it was 5 months of lockdown. I think it was a couple of months ago, there was a series of articles on Zoom fatigue. And at the time I was like, yeah, that happens to people who have hearing loss and people who are neurodiverse, so some people who have autism, for example. We get brain fatigue really easily because the brain's trying to process so much. Like I get auditory signals in, but my brain spends a lot longer trying to process those signals into something coherent. So when I do Zoom calls, etc., it's exhausting for me. If I do a full-on data conference, I am wiped out and I need a nap because my brain is like, that was overwhelming and I just need some quiet time. Sorry, to back, that's sort of tangent, but to get back to the question, there aren't many best practice guides out there. I would always say that if you can put accessibility features in at the time, please do, and those vary. It might be captions on screen, it might be that you hire a BSL interpreter, it might be that you do smaller sessions so it's less intense. You could give people the option for sort of sitting in different recordings, and there are ways to do it, but I've not yet seen a full and best practice guide. One of the things that does exist, and it's more for physical events, and I don't know if she's adopted it, is there's a site called Ideas for Ears, and she published an event guide essentially. So if you're planning any kind of event, it's a really good accessibility guide. I'll send the link to you after this. Maybe we can send it around in notes, but that's the only guide I really know of at the moment that exists to help people plan and put decent accessibility measures in place.
Yeah, I think the fact that there's not the kind of guides out there shows that there's a real problem.
Yeah, it's an afterthought. Accessibility is always an afterthought, and it's always a luxury. We were talking about captions on things like Zoom. Accessibility features aren't like on software like this, are really far behind, and they're not good. And it's one of those weird things where it's a basic function to communicate with another person, whether it's digitally or in person, and most of the big tech companies view it as this bonus, this luxury item that you have to pay for as a, you know, a specialist feature, or they don't really put much effort into developing them. So there's a huge big ableism issue in terms of basic accessibility for digital assets, really.
Yeah, well, like you touched on, I tried and kind of halfway there to getting captions on for the live session now, but the recording will be captioned. So we're taking steps in the right direction. So another question here, we've probably got time for a couple more, but I don't want to kind of make you exhausted. When working with commissioning editors, I'd like to be more forward in recommending asking to work with more journalists with disabilities. Do you have any tips for how to approach this?
Oh, that's a good question. I think almost like you'd pitch a story, you'd pitch the benefit of doing it. So if you're doing that, I say what we'd really like is to hear these voices, because these voices are important and they have a lot to say, and the skills that they can bring are something that we really want to engage with, and maybe like put your own position as to why you want to do it and reasoning and clear it. But you just kind of have to ask. Like, I think that's the thing about the whole accessibility or diversity discussions is, like, at some point you just have to say, no, we want more of this, and we'd like you to deliver it, please. So the best way, I would just say, be honest about that you want to hear these voices and why you want to hear them and why you think it's a necessary thing to do. And, you know, if you've got anything that you can tie into the conversations that you're having, for example, if that company or that publication has published anything on diversity, or if they've spoken about it, or they've brought up something about Black Lives Matter, then raise that with them and say, we know you brought this up, so actually what we'd like to see is this. Can you deliver it?
Really useful there. It's a bit of a nice range of questions as well coming in. It's really great. So I've got one here. Gosh, it's a bit of a toughie, but I work in the environmental science sector, one of the most poorly represented in terms of BAME and disabled professionals. What advice would you give to make sure individuals feel supported and avoid the feeling of tokenism to increase diversity at events, etc.?
Yeah, I feel you, because I also work in those kind of sectors, and all the sectors I work in are pretty much male dominated. They're like cis white male dominated. That's it. And it is really, really hard. And I would say training is a first step. So try and broach training if you can, to look at different areas of it, and actually, particularly in disability training as well, I think a lot of that is really useful because it helps people understand tokenism a little bit more and ableism and how to avoid it. There's a lot of things that people do that are ableist that they might not realise that they're doing. And I think training is a key way to opening people's eyes in the first instance to make them aware of it, and then try and develop and build relationships for it. It's a tough one, to be honest, because I'm still trying to figure that out myself in those kind of sectors, and they are hard, and it is hard to have those discussions. But I would say if you can broach training, if you have any kind of like town halls or any kind of major team meetings, then why not just put in diversity as a topic to talk about? It doesn't need to be specific, but I think you could say that actually this is an issue affecting every organisation in every sector, and we need to look at ourselves and figure out what we're doing about it. Can we have like just an open discussion company meeting? It doesn't need to be about any one person, it doesn't need to be about a specific thing, but just, we've seen loads of things happening in the news, for example. What do people do? Or do you think we're doing enough as a company to do it? Like if you work in a big enough sector and there's an internal comms function, could they support you? Could they do some kind of internal survey or poll to see whether there are more staff who have sort of extra requirements who are not being supported, for example, and maybe an internal comms campaign? So there's a few ways you can maybe approach it. I'd say training is a first step, and then approach it from maybe having like an open discussion about it, or trying to foster an open discussion. That was a tough question.
Yeah, sorry, I did give you a heads up that it was a tough one. So we've got another one come in here, which kind of like has a wider topic really. We work with a diverse range of innovators across the different projects we run. How can we ensure that the application process for those people to get involved is more accessible so that it isn't a barrier, which I guess kind of also expands into recruitment as a whole, making sure that application process doesn't automatically eliminate or disqualify somebody because it's in a font that somebody with a visual impairment finds hard to read.
There's a lot to consider in that aspect. So make it as simple as possible in terms of clarity for actual layout and font. Give clear instructions. Think about the language that you use. We tend to have very gendered language in our recruitment ads, and especially in the comms sector, the creative sector, we use things like champion, ninja, and gurus, all these kind of really weird words, and a lot of people don't feel like they'll fit into that bracket, but they're perfectly like qualified to apply for that job. But the way we write about it can sometimes put people off. So be very conscious of the language. Try and strip out gendered language from it. Try and strip out ableist language for it. If you are offering flexible working, and if you have those systems in place, make them clear as well. Try and anticipate any questions people might ask. So accessibility for interviews, for example, say what you will and won't do. Have a basic a very basic level at which you will interview, for example. So one of the things that has come up when we've been doing the blueprint work is that a lot of Black and Asian and mixed race colleagues are held at junior levels for quite a long time, and actually they're perfectly capable of going up and progressing and being promoted, but they're being overlooked because of racial biases. So if you have a base level that says, actually, if you've been working at this level, junior accounting level, for 3 years or 4 years, we will give you an interview. That is our baseline for giving you an interview, because actually you might get someone who is qualified but doesn't meet the criteria that you would normally put. So have a baseline for where you would interview people. And then look at where you're recruiting as well. So push back on recruiters if they don't offer you diverse lists. Use some disability job boards, for example. I think is it Taylor Bennett you can advertise with? There's a couple of organisations you can put out posts. So look at where you're advertising those applications as well.
Thanks. That's really, really useful. So I've got 2 questions left. One's a bit of a biggie, and one might be a little bit short. So I'll leave you with the short one for last. So what has been the greatest challenge when it comes to developing PR campaigns that are inclusive of disability?
Oh, That is hard for me. I don't work in those sectors. That's a difficult thing. Is I work in really technical sectors, so I write things about like current transducers and offshore wind turbines. So I feel like I actually have a personal challenge to make that happen anyway. I think one of the big challenges in PR campaigns is to not make it look like tokenism. That's a big one. Yeah. So have the people there because they're there, don't have them because it's a token. Think about why you're including them as well. Like, you know, if they've got, give them something to do rather than just have them there and say, hey, we had a disabled person there. Like, look at us, we did a good thing. So make sure that they're actually included in the process properly and what that means. And I think broaching it with clients as well is a big one. You know, as creatives, we get these briefs in and it's our job to interrogate that brief. And if you get one that says we just want X family and it's like in a white 2.4 family or whatever it is, then you have to go, well, actually, do we need that? Why don't we broaden our pool of people that we go to? If you use a modelling agency, for example, or a casting agency, broaden that out. There's some specialist agencies that do work purely with disabled individuals who can come in and really present that to your clients and actually offer them those choices and say, we have a really good range of people to choose from here, and push it back on them and say, we recommend that you do this because actually 20% of the UK population has a disability. That's 20% of people that you have to represent in your campaigns.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think I follow one of the disability modelling agents, Zebedee Management, on Instagram. I recommend that to everybody. It's fantastic. Like, the photography is incredible. So last question, and it's much more a practical one. Any automated captioning software I have used is rubbish, and by the time you go in and edit the text, you might as well have written out manually, which can be very time consuming, especially in long videos. I feel this person's pain. I think they've done this more than once. Do you know any decent automated captioning software for video?
Very little. Like, honestly, it is a huge problem for industry. I use Rev. They seem to cope okay with my accent, which is always a barrier, with like a benchmark for me. If they can cope with the Scottish accent, they're pretty much okay. There's Google Live Transcribe and a few apps like that, but they are problematic. The Rev is okay. It does an AI one, which is a bit hit and miss. And I probably spend maybe an hour going through a long transcript from like a podcast that I've recorded. If it's an hour long, it spends me I take another hour to go through it. If you pay a bit extra, they'll do a person transcripted one, and those are quite accurate most of the time. But it is so far behind. Captioning software is very far behind, and it's got a long way to go. And it varies on the clarity of the recording. It varies on accent. It varies on noise in the background. All these things impact the quality of the results that you get. And yeah, I don't have any beyond that. I've struggled myself to find it, so I totally feel that person's pain, because it is hard to find captioning software, and actually that puts people off. This is why we don't get the accessibility we need, because people go, it's expensive, it's time consuming, it's too much of a faff. Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine. And so people don't bother. And it's like, you know, these big tech companies putting all this development into amazing products, put it into your accessibility, include all these people, and you will see those resources be used so much more.
That's so we've had another question, but it's kind of for automated captioning. I like otter.ai.
Yeah.
So that's another recommendation. We've got a couple, but unfortunately, I'm not surprised that there's still a lot of work to do. And so thank you so much, Sarah. This has been so useful, so educational. I think we've kind of, everybody, like panelists and kind of all the attendees that we've had join us today will definitely have got plenty of stuff to take away. I know I certainly have, and going to be looking at our forms for sure, making sure that they're much more accessible to people, and the content we put out as well. So yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for everybody joining us today. I will make a recording of this, and there will be captioning on it, whether it's by hook or by crook. It will be done, I promise. Yeah, thank you so much for everybody, and big thanks again to Sarah.
Thank you so much. It was a great session. Thank you.
Thank you.